Do you feel like you are painting too slowly? Or do you watch me paint on here and think, I wish I could do that fast? Well, today's video is for you. I'm going to be talking all about what it means to paint quickly and effectively. I'm going to talk about some of the most common misconceptions about painting fast, and I'm going to tell you what strides you can take in order to paint faster yourself. If you're new and you enjoy this video, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon because I put out new videos like this every week. All right, let's jump into it. And I want to kick off today by talking about the biggest misconceptions around painting quickly. So painting fast and painting loosely often go hand in hand, at least in people's minds. They imagine that if you are painting loosely, that you are painting fast. And I think the biggest misconception that I hear surrounding these two concepts are that painting quickly and painting loosely are easier than painting tight or painting really slowly. And I'm using the verb paint here, but this really applies no matter your medium. So this applies whether you're talking about drawing, you're talking about pastel, you're talking about oil paint. This is truly medium agnostic, but for the purposes of this video, I'm probably going to talk in terms of painting. But regardless of medium, we really need to disconnect the idea of speed or looseness from ease. In fact, all of these concepts should really be thought of independently. You can be a slow, loose painter, or you could be fast and tight and not particularly accurate. I talk to a lot of people who are interested in looseness or painting alla prima or painting in one sitting because they don't think they have it in them to take a more painstaking, slow, academic approach like you would see with classical cast drawings or paintings, or the very tight academic figure work that comes out of some of the popular ateliers that are available today. And I think these associations really miss the point. There are things that are just as difficult about working tight versus working loose versus fast versus slow. But given that I'm a painter who errs on the side of painting more loosely and that I err on the side of painting more quickly, I want to speak to these things today because this is where I have the most experience, and this is where I talk to a lot of artists. A lot of artists interested in getting mentorship or getting help talk to me about their preconceived notions, specifically around speed and around looseness. And I want to speak to those today. So for myself personally, I really gravitate toward loose painting because first and foremost, I find the calligraphy and the mark making most beautiful in this particular kind of work. It's not that I think that it's easier because you have more freedom or you don't have to be quite as accurate. In fact, I actually find the opposite to be true. In order to really evoke the subject you're trying to capture while working loosely, it's essential, in fact, that you have a really, really clear structure in your drawing and that you have really nailed the anatomy or you've really captured someone's proportions in order to get the likeness down on the canvas. In fact, most painters I know who work loosely and do it really beautifully came from a more academic background where they worked very tight for a long time. So if you're just getting started and you think to yourself, I really just want to do something that I can accomplish, and so I'm going to go the loose route, just know that that's probably not going to turn out the way that you intend, and that actually, counterintuitively, you probably want to take some time learning to really work very tightly and accurately, even if that means slowing down for a little while in order to master that level of drawing or control over your value structure. Now, because I want to work loosely, and that means most of the time working alla prima, I have had to learn to paint fairly quickly. You know, my paintings are going to be at their best when I can do them all in one sitting and the paint is going to be wet the entire time. That being said, when I watch really masterful alla prima painters work, they're going incredibly slowly. Every brushstroke is well thought out. It's very deliberate. It's not kind of what you actually imagine it to look like based on how spontaneous the final painting looks. In fact, every mark was laid down with a great degree of care. And so, somewhat counterintuitively, in order to work looser, it's often necessary to really slow down and get more thoughtful than you might otherwise be. With that being said, I really admire painters who can capture a likeness really quickly or with minimal errors in their block-in, where they start, every mark they make seems to fall into the right place, and before you know it, they have a full likeness using the absolute minimum number of brushstrokes necessary. And that's something that I've been really interested in lately. So I reached out to one of my friends who is an absolute master of accurate, expressive, and fast drawing. This is Millie Hankinson. I've talked about her in several of my more recent videos because I reached out to her and I wound up taking one of her classes. In fact, I'm still in this class right now, using this opportunity to really push myself to learn as much as I can about this way of working. And one of my big takeaways from studying with her is, well, there's a few things, but most recently, what I've been focusing on is going through and actually forcing myself to work on a shorter time limit. So I've been working primarily in pencil for right now, but what you're seeing me put down on this newsprint here is exactly the same way that I would tackle this in a painting or the block into a painting. I've been going through, and what I've found has worked really well has been to kick off with 2-minute warm-ups. These are akin to doing, 1-minute gestures or 30-second gestures even if you're in a figure drawing class. Except instead I'm focused on the portrait and trying to do what I can to capture as much of the likeness as possible in that 2-minute window. After I've warmed up on a few of these and 2 minutes doesn't feel like I'm constantly racing, then I give myself 5 minutes. And suddenly, in that 5-minute window, I'm actually able to get a halfway decent drawing. And then when I give myself more like 15 or 20 minutes, or if I'm just feeling really into a particular drawing and I don't worry about the clock and I go for maybe an hour, suddenly it really does feel like I'm one of those artists who can get the block in really accurately, really efficiently, and the drawing is just coming together in a way that feels not just more accurate, but also more expressive because I'm not getting overly tight and I'm not making marks that don't matter because I'm not being mindful of how I'm using my time. For the time being, I've been giving myself a little bit of a break from painting in order to just practice this with charcoal. And I'm honestly excited to get back to the easel, but it's probably not going to be for a few more weeks. But I'm really excited to see how this translates. I think that taking a break from this in order to focus on dry media has been really helpful. The cleanup is so much simpler than oil, and it just feels a lot more approachable as a result. What I imagine will happen when I do make this transition back to painting is that I will probably use this same method of warming up and getting ready beforehand. So I might do some 2-minute and then 5-minute head studies in charcoal on newsprint. And then after I feel warm and I feel like I'm seeing everything fairly accurately, then I will go ahead and I will make the switch and I will pull out my paint and my brushes and my canvas and begin work on there. And I will probably begin that piece much the same way you see me working on these. Really thinking about the anatomy of the face, the basic proportions, checking that drawing the whole way through, and really finding this balance between trying to find the likeness without rushing. And so if you find yourself painting too slowly, I would encourage you to try something similar. And there's a lot of different ways this can work. So for instance, if you are stuck, tracing or using a grid or using a projector right now, okay, well, in order for us to get you drawing or painting more quickly, the first thing we need to do is to free you from things that might have become crutches that are kind of known for slowing us down. Tracing, projecting, using grids, these are all really effective tools, and they simply take more time. Even things like proportional dividers or using relative measurements using your brush handle, those things can slow us down quite a bit. So for you, a first step might involve figuring out how you can wean yourself off of that tool and do a little bit more of guessing and checking and potentially using those tools just as needed to make sure you're on the right track rather than feeling like you're overly reliant upon them. Now, once you're comfortable in this space where you feel like you can capture a portrait accurately, doing it freehand, but it's just taking you too long, that I think is where this exercise is really going to help you. And what I would suggest is kicking off with really short, kind of gestural sessions of capturing likeness across multiple portraits. So for me, that looked like 2 minutes. Then from there, I more than doubled that by moving on to 5 minutes. And then by the time I would give myself 20 minutes, it felt like I could actually get in the whole portrait. And I really didn't feel this way before. Before I started doing these 2, 5, and then 20-minute sessions, I felt like I could barely get the block-in done by the 20-minute mark. And even just one session of mindfully going and jumping into 2 minutes and then 5 minutes and then 20, well, by the end of the 20-minute sittings, I felt like I really had portraits that were as far along as I had intended to take them. Now, if you're working in paint, this amount of time might differ a little bit, but I think it actually will benefit you to potentially look at working with charcoal and newsprint just so that you aren't having to add on time because of your materials. But if you do want to do something similar in paint, I would probably think about, 10 minutes and 20 minutes and then maybe an hour instead of the very short amount of time that we have on newsprint. I'll have to experiment with this for myself because I haven't tested this approach in paint yet, but just know that you might want to give yourself a little bit more time if you aren't working in drawing media. And for me, I typically go through about 4 or 5 of each of these stages. So I might do 4 or 5 2-minute portraits, then move on to 4 or 5 5-minute portraits, and then probably 3 or 4 20 minutes before I need a little bit of a mental break. Now, I would say the benefit from intentionally working at different lengths of time is that, yes, forcing yourself to try and get as much in a 2-minute window as possible is really useful for forcing you to think efficiently and not waste time. But part of really seeing accurately is slowing down too. And you get a great deal of a benefit when you are working on a 20-minute sketch or a 1-hour sketch or even like a multi-day sketch. All of these are going to build into one another, which is why this variety is so helpful. And I think it's important when you start to get too reliant on one pace of working to then switch it up. So if you start to feel really comfortable giving yourself multiple days on a drawing, well, that's a signal that you're probably going to get a lot of benefit out of really shortening up that window that you have to work. Or, for me, I typically paint in one sitting now. Sometimes I am cutting myself off of the lessons that I could learn from slower paintings or slower drawings. And so it's really helpful for me to intentionally encourage myself to take a painting further and further and stretched over multiple days. But if you are one of those painters who notoriously works on a painting for weeks, if not months, and you dream of being able to finish a painting in one sitting, know that it is possible. I see this over and over with the artists that I coach, and using this exercise that we've talked about today is the number one tool that I use to help them to prove to themselves that they can actually do this. They can finish pieces in one sitting and be truly proud of the result. If you'd like to learn more about my mentorships and how they work, there's a link down in the description to find out more and apply to see if we are a fit to work together. All right, and until next time, happy painting.